Did you know that home workouts didn't fail because people were lazy, unmotivated, or inconsistent? They failed because the human body adapts far faster than motivation can sustain effort, and most home workout routines were never designed with that biological reality in mind. What was once promoted as the ultimate solution to modern fitness problems, no commute, no gym fees, no excuses, slowly revealed a deeper flaw. Home workouts promised freedom and efficiency, but they quietly ignored how progress in the human body actually works. When home workouts surged in popularity, they were more than a trend. For millions of people, they became the foundation of their health routine. Living rooms turned into gyms. Apps replaced trainers. Bodyweight circuits replaced barbells. At first, it felt empowering. Fitness was finally accessible, flexible, and customizable. But when that foundation began to crack, the consequences extended beyond missed workouts or stalled physiques. When a system fails repeatedly, people don't just lose results, they lose trust in the process itself. Over time, exercise stopped feeling like a tool for health and began to feel like a reminder of failure. Home workouts were built on a simple and attractive idea. Remove friction and consistency will follow. No travel time, no crowded spaces, no intimidating equipment. Just show up, press play, and move. In theory, this eliminated the biggest barriers to fitness, and for a brief period it worked. People moved more, they exercised more frequently, they felt productive and in control. But fitness isn't defined by convenience. It's defined by stimulus. The body doesn't adapt because movement happened. It adapts because stress was applied in a precise, escalating way. That distinction is where the system began to break down. Early success masked the underlying problem. Beginners saw quick improvements. Muscles felt sore. Heart rates climbed. Endurance improved. This initial progress wasn't proof that home workouts were superior. It was proof that the human body responds rapidly to any new stimulus. For someone starting from zero, even basic movements create change. Push-ups feel challenging. Squats elevate breathing. Short sessions feel intense. The body responds because it has no choice. But the body is also incredibly efficient. Once it learns a pattern, it minimizes effort. Without increased demand, adaptation slows and eventually stops. This is where most home workouts reached their ceiling. They were excellent at initiating movement, but poor at sustaining progress. The routines rarely evolved in a structured way. Exercises stayed similar. Resistance stayed limited. Intensity was increased not by adding load, but by adding speed, volume, or fatigue. This approach created exhaustion without meaningful progression. People felt tired, but their bodies weren't being asked to do anything new. Over time, workouts felt harder while results became less visible, a combination that almost always leads to disengagement. The first major reason home workouts failed long-term is the absence of progressive overload. Every meaningful physical adaptation, strength, muscle growth, fat loss, cardiovascular efficiency, depends on gradually increasing demand. The body needs a reason to change. In traditional training environments, this happens naturally. Weights increase. Resistance scales. Performance is measurable. At home, most programs relied on bodyweight movements that quickly reached their maximum effectiveness. There are only so many push-ups or squats a person can do before the stimulus stops being sufficient. Without external load or precise progression, the body adapts just enough to survive the routine, then stops improving. This isn't a motivation issue. It's not about discipline or willpower. It's about biology. When the stimulus remains constant, the body conserves energy. That's its job. Home workouts ask the body to work harder emotionally while asking it to work the same physically. Eventually, the mismatch becomes obvious. Effort rises, results stagnate, frustration grows. People don't quit because they don't care. They quit because the system stopped rewarding effort. Compounding this problem was the widespread misunderstanding of intensity. Many home workouts equated intensity with exhaustion. The faster the pace, the shorter the rest, the more sweat produced. The more effective the workout was assumed to be. Fatigue became the metric of success. But fatigue is not the same as productive stress. Feeling tired does not mean the body has been challenged in a way that forces adaptation. High repetition circuits and non-stop movement elevate heart rate and burn calories in the moment, but they often fail to apply enough mechanical tension to muscles, the primary driver of long-term physical change. In controlled training environments, intensity scales through resistance. At home, intensity was scaled through discomfort. Faster movements, longer circuits, less rest. This created metabolic stress without structural adaptation. The body learned to tolerate discomfort rather than build strength. Over time, workouts became draining rather than empowering. People pushed harder, not smarter. And when increased effort stopped producing change, enthusiasm quietly faded. Another subtle issue emerged alongside this illusion of intensity: the erosion of clear feedback. Effective training relies on objective signals. Heavier weights, improved performance, visible benchmarks. These markers tell the body and the mind that progress is happening. Home workouts removed most of these signals. Without external resistance or clear metrics, progress became subjective. How a workout felt replaced what it achieved. Small form errors went unnoticed. Inefficient movement patterns became habits. Without feedback, repetition replaced refinement. As weeks turned into months, many people weren't actually training. They were repeating movements without direction. Exercise became an activity rather than a system. And systems matter. The body adapts to patterns, not randomness. Many home workout programs emphasized variety, novelty, and constant change. Every session was different. Every week introduced new movements. While this kept things interesting, it prevented long-term adaptation. Without consistency, the body had nothing to master. Without mastery, there was no progression. Without progression, there were no results. Underlying all of this was an environmental challenge that home workouts could never fully overcome. Environment shapes behavior more powerfully than motivation. Training spaces signal intent. Gyms create psychological separation between effort and rest. Home environments blur that line. The same space used for work, relaxation, and distraction became the training ground. Notifications, unfinished tasks, screens, and fatigue competed for attention. Even when workouts were scheduled, they were easier to delay. There was no transition, no ritual, no external reinforcement. Over time, training began to feel optional rather than intentional. Missed sessions became easier to justify. Shortcuts felt harmless. The habit weakened not because people stopped caring, but because the environment made consistency fragile. When progress slowed and effort increased, the system no longer supported commitment. By the time many people realized something wasn't working, the damage was already done, not to their bodies, but to their mindset. Exercise became associated with frustration instead of progress. Home workouts didn't just fail to deliver results, they quietly reshaped expectations. People began to believe that effort didn't pay off, that fitness was inherently temporary, that motivation always fades. The truth is more nuanced. The problem wasn't effort. It wasn't discipline. It wasn't even home workouts themselves. It was the assumption that convenience alone could replace structure, progression, and feedback, the very elements the human body requires to change. This is where the story of home workouts truly begins, not with their promise, but with the biological and behavioral realities they overlooked. The second phase of the failure became visible only after the initial enthusiasm wore off. Once the novelty of home workouts faded, a deeper issue surfaced. People were working harder while progressing less. This wasn't accidental. Most home workout systems were designed around engagement rather than adaptation. They optimized for how workouts felt, not for what they produced. Variety replaced progression. Convenience replaced precision. Over time, exercise turned into a performance of effort rather than a process of improvement. One of the most damaging misconceptions was that more movement automatically meant better results. Home workouts encouraged frequency and volume without a clear long-term plan. Daily sessions, back-to-back circuits, and minimal rest were framed as discipline. But the body doesn't reward constant stress. It rewards strategic stress followed by recovery. Without adequate recovery, adaptation stalls. Muscles repair and grow when stress is applied and then removed. Many home workouts never allowed that cycle to complete. Instead, they kept the body in a constant state of mild fatigue, enough to feel busy but insufficient to trigger meaningful change. This chronic fatigue had consequences beyond stalled progress. Joints began to ache, tendons became irritated, small discomforts accumulated. Without guidance or correction, people pushed through pain they didn't fully understand. Because the workouts were body weight-based, they were assumed to be safe. But repetitive movement patterns performed under fatigue can be just as damaging as heavy lifting done improperly. Without feedback, form deteriorated gradually. Knees collapsed inward during squats, shoulders rolled forward during push-ups, core engagement weakened. These weren't dramatic injuries. They were subtle inefficiencies that compounded over time. As physical discomfort increased, enthusiasm decreased. Workouts that once felt energizing began to feel draining. Recovery took longer. Motivation fluctuated. Many people responded by changing programs, switching apps, or trying new routines. This constant reset created the illusion of starting fresh while masking the underlying issue. The body never had time to adapt to any one system. Progress remained elusive, and the cycle repeated. Another factor that contributed to failure was the absence of accountability. In traditional training environments, accountability is built into the system. Trainers observe. Equipment tracks load. Progress is visible. At home, accountability relies entirely on self-reporting. Did the workout feel hard? Did it leave you sweaty? These subjective measures replaced objective ones. Without external reference points, it became difficult to know whether training was effective or merely exhausting. This lack of accountability also affected effort. Without structure, intensity fluctuated unpredictably. Some days were pushed too hard, others barely at all. Training became reactive rather than intentional. The body thrives on consistency, not randomness. When effort is inconsistent, adaptation is inconsistent. The result is a plateau that feels mysterious but is entirely predictable. Home workouts also struggled to address the psychological role of resistance. Resistance isn't just physical, it's mental. Lifting heavier weights provides clear evidence of progress. It builds confidence and reinforces commitment. Bodyweight training, while valuable, lacks this tangible progression for most people, beyond the beginner stage. When the external challenge stops increasing, the internal reward diminishes. Effort feels less meaningful when it doesn't produce visible markers of improvement. This absence of tangible progress led many people to internalize failure. Instead of questioning the system, they questioned themselves. They assumed they weren't disciplined enough, consistent enough, or genetically suited for fitness. This misattribution is one of the most harmful consequences of poorly designed training systems. When effort doesn't lead to results, people don't just quit the program. They quit the belief that change is possible. Behaviorally, home workouts also removed many of the cues that reinforce habit formation. Training rituals matter. Preparing. Gear. Traveling to a dedicated space, and transitioning mentally into effort all signal commitment. Home workouts collapsed these rituals into a single moment. Roll out of bed, press play, start moving. While efficient, this stripped training of ceremony. Without a clear beginning and end, workouts blended into daily life rather than standing apart from it. Over time, this made skipping sessions easier. There was no cost to postponement, no social presence, no environmental pressure. Training became something to fit in rather than something to protect. As stress increased and schedules filled, workouts were often the first thing sacrificed. Not because people didn't value health, but because the system didn't defend itself against competing priorities. Another overlooked issue was the mismatch between expectations and outcomes. Home workouts were marketed as complete solutions. They promised transformation without equipment, space, or time. For beginners, these promises felt real, but as progress slowed, expectations remained high. This gap between expectation and reality created disappointment. The problem wasn't that home workouts offered no benefit. It was that they were oversold as universal answers. Fitness is not one size fits all. Different bodies respond differently to stimuli. Some people thrive on minimal equipment and high repetition. Others require heavier loads to see change. Home workouts rarely accounted for these differences. They were designed for broad appeal, not individual adaptation. This generalized approach left many people underserved, especially those beyond the beginner stage. As months passed, the narrative around home workouts shifted. What began as empowerment turned into obligation. What felt freeing became limiting. People weren't failing the workouts. The workouts were failing to evolve with them. Yet the messaging rarely acknowledged this. Instead, the solution offered was always more effort, more consistency, more motivation. Rarely was the system itself questioned. This is the quiet failure that defines many fitness trends. When systems stop producing results, responsibility is shifted onto individuals. The reality is that sustainable progress requires alignment between biology, behavior, and environment. Home workouts addressed convenience but neglected adaptation. They removed barriers but also removed essential mechanisms that drive long-term change. By this point, many people had already disengaged. Some returned to gyms, others stopped training altogether. A few continued at home, accepting maintenance over progress. The pattern was clear. Home workouts worked temporarily, then plateaued, then quietly faded from priority. Not because they were inherently flawed, but because they were incomplete. Understanding this phase of failure is crucial because it reframes the conversation. Home workouts didn't collapse overnight. They eroded gradually as biological needs went unmet and behavioral supports weakened. The system asked for effort without offering progression, discipline without feedback, and consistency without reward, and that imbalance is unsustainable. The body doesn't respond to good intentions. It responds to signals. When those signals stop changing, so does the body. When effort stops producing results, behavior changes. The failure of home workouts wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was subtle, cumulative, and predictable. It unfolded exactly as physiology and psychology would suggest. This sets the stage for the final and most important realization. Home workouts didn't fail because they were wrong, but because they were misunderstood. And without that understanding, they were used in ways they were never meant to be used. The final section will bring this together, not by rejecting home workouts, but by redefining what they can and cannot do. By the time the limitations of home workouts became undeniable, many people had already drawn the wrong conclusion. They assumed the problem was personal rather than structural. They believed they lacked discipline, motivation, or consistency. In reality, the system they were following had quietly removed the very elements required for sustained physical adaptation. Home workouts didn't fail because effort disappeared. They failed because the body had no reason to continue changing. The human body is designed to adapt efficiently. When a stimulus is repeated without escalation, the body conserves energy by minimizing response. This is not a flaw, it is a survival mechanism. Effective training works with this mechanism by progressively increasing demand. Home workouts, as they were commonly practiced, rarely did this. Once the body adapted to the movements, progress slowed, then stopped. No amount of repetition could overcome that biological reality. This is where the nuance becomes important. Home workouts are not inherently ineffective. They are effective in specific contexts. For beginners, they build foundational movement patterns. They improve coordination, mobility, and basic conditioning. They lower the barrier to entry and help establish the habit of regular movement. In these roles, they work exactly as intended. The failure occurred when home workouts were treated as complete replacements for structured training rather than as entry points or supplemental tools. Strength, muscle development, and long-term metabolic health require increasing mechanical demand. They require feedback, progression, and periods of recovery. When these elements are missing, the body adapts only enough to maintain function, not to improve. Another overlooked truth is that training is not solely physical. It is behavioral and environmental. Systems that support consistency protect themselves against friction. Gyms do this by creating physical separation, social reinforcement, and visible progress markers. Home workouts removed friction, but also removed many of these supports. What remained was a system dependent almost entirely on self-regulation, which is fragile under stress. As life became busier, workouts became easier to skip. Without progression, effort felt less rewarding. Without feedback, improvement was hard to recognize. Without environment, training lost its psychological anchor. Over time, even motivated individuals struggled to maintain momentum. This was not a personal failure. It was a predictable outcome of a system that relied too heavily on convenience and not enough on adaptation. Understanding this reframes the narrative around home workouts. They didn't fail because they were poorly intentioned or fundamentally flawed. They failed because they were oversimplified. Fitness was reduced to movement alone, ignoring the principles that govern long-term change. When those principles are absent, results are temporary. The most important takeaway is not that home workouts should be abandoned, but that they should be used appropriately. They are tools, not solutions. They are most effective when paired with progression, external, resistance, structured planning, and clear feedback. Without these elements, they are limited by design. When training is built around biology rather than convenience, effort becomes productive again. Progress becomes measurable. Consistency becomes sustainable. The body responds not to how hard workouts feel, but to how intelligently they are structured. The failure of home workouts reveals a broader lesson about health and fitness. Systems that ignore human physiology and behavior eventually collapse, no matter how appealing they seem at first. Real progress requires alignment between stimulus, environment, and expectation. Once that alignment is restored, movement stops, feeling like a struggle, and starts functioning as it was meant to, a signal for the body to adapt, strengthen, and endure. Understanding this doesn't just explain why home workouts failed. It changes how training should be approached entirely.